Champions League final weekend. Graham Hunter, good morning to you.
Morning, how are you?
Great, and thanks a million for jumping on. We're excited to talk about it. We were having a bit of a debate on the show yesterday as to whether people generally were excited about the fact that it's the Champions League final. It's Manchester City against Inter Milan in Istanbul tomorrow night, and we got a lot of reaction from people on social, and I would summarise it by saying people are a little bit meh.
What did they say? Why? I can't understand it.
I think the rationale would be that I think a lot of people who would sit in the fence wouldn't be particularly into Manchester City winning it, and then I know Inter have won it 4 times, but maybe more recently they're not seen as one of the powerhouses of Europe.
Well, I mean, I don't want to come on and try and persuade those. You know, you've led me into a situation where you know how I'm going to react if the Champions League final was between Partick Thistle and Clare. I'd still be head over heels excited about it. It's the pinnacle of European football, and I'm addicted to it, and I have been since I was a kid. I'm far more attracted by the idea about whether I don't want to portray Inter as the villains in a footballing sense in any way, but they're a hard-working team that understands its own limitations. They certainly have some standout footballers, but I've watched a lot of their play this season, and it's squeezing space, it's wing backs, and I realise as I'm saying all this, I'm maybe not selling it to those who are a bit meh about the final, but that's the fact about how Inzaghi's team plays. They're bullies in the best sense of it. If they find they have a weaker team in front of them, then you can have fun watching them, because there's a cluster of skillful players, which would include Barella, Çalhanoğlu, Lautaro Martinez is on very, very good form at the moment. And I think that there's no mistaking how they're going to play against City. They're going to try and close the spaces. They're going to try and understand that if the City system might be complex to train, to design, but it's relatively easy to understand what you can do to stop the system functioning, which is that if you can close the spaces in which particularly Ilkay Gundogan and Bernie Silva, as I learned that the team call him, we were at training, it was a fantastic privilege, I think, when you can watch any top football team train throughout a full session. I find it a huge privilege because you learn a lot. And one of the things I learned is that Bernardo Silva is Bernie to his teammates, which just didn't sound right at all. But if you can close the spaces in which the Turk and Silva and De Bruyne like to function, then the quality of ball that either Grealish gets in terms of being one-on-one against his rival, or Haaland getting space to run into, the quality of ball delivered to him changes. And that's what Inter are going to try to do, definitely. And I'm not saying that if given a chance they can't play. They'll certainly be strong at set plays. They'll be keen to shoot from distance. They definitely have heightened power across man for man, not every single matchup, but across the two teams they have a heightened power bias in Inter's favour. And for me, I'm going to be fascinated as to how Manchester City Harry Houdini themselves out of the press and the asphyxiation that Inter are going to try and put on them, and those who aren't excited about it find fair. But we're looking at history. We're looking at the potential for a treble. No coach has ever done 2 trebles. No coach, thereby, it's de facto that no coach has done a treble at 2 different clubs. Guardiola and Chico Begiristain would be responsible for 2 trebles if they achieve it on Saturday night. And for my taste as well, Manchester City's football is absolutely, it's stunning. It's beautiful when it functions. It's highly complex, and it's hugely risky, and it's really, really enjoyable.
I think you've sort of cut to the nub of the issue there in terms of also, and I'm in the realms of supposition now, but I'm probably leaning my own biases into it as well, about the predicted outcome of the game, and a lot of people feeling that it will be in Man City's favour. But you lean in on something there, Graham, that we might tease out a little bit more about that Inzaghi style of play, that sort of compact 3-5-2. There might have been, as you called out yourself, a little bit of a pejorative nature to some of the comments you make about his lineup and how they're pretty solid all over the pitch without the star names maybe of the likes of Manchester City. but there's been some fairly average Premier League teams that have got some success out of City in the season just gone, with sort of sitting a little bit deeper. Is that how you expect this game to certainly start out?
I don't expect them to sit deep as such. I do think, having watched Inter a lot, that what they do is they try to make sure that there's no spaces, that the gaps that the three key footballers operate in are closed. So, and they're also bullies. They're a very physical side. I think the pits of Italian football was shown by Roma and Mourinho, and it's not going to be quite like that. I thought they were, and I knew that was coming. I'd watched Roma this season, and I think that Mourinho, who's just the lowest of the low in terms of what you want in sport, as far as I'm concerned, knew that he had to try and maximise anything to try and win, and it was a really ugly spectacle. And Sevilla contributed, without question. They contributed, and Inter aren't going to be like that. But I'm coming to the point that Shane, they will bully. It will be win at any cost, because that's built into the Italian footballing nature, and therefore I think that if you're not an Interista, it'll be very easy watching it to put the black hat on them and think they're the baddies of the thing, because they won't need to or want to entertain. They have the capacity to. They definitely. Anybody who watched the way in which Inter ripped Milan in the first half hour of the first leg of the semi-final, they were on top of them. And that's my point. So if they sniff that they've got, let's say City just have an outright bad night. Let's say City are not as prime as they need to be going out there. For example, in 2009, when Pep won his first treble, the third part of it was in Roma, in the Olympic Stadium, and it was against Manchester United. And it's now pretty well known that Pep decided that an inspirational tool at the end of a long season, where they'd won the title, and they did an interesting final in the Cup against Athletic Bilbao, going 1-0 down and having worked very hard to get back into it, but ultimately winning 4-1. He gave the players in the dressing room a video composed by a local television technician of the highs and lows of their season so far, with images of their family and friends and kids in it, to the theme tune of Gladiator. And the players testify, and we made a film about all of this, so we've spoken to them directly about. Some of them were in tears, some of them went out with wobbly knees, and they walk out to who's the beautiful Italian singer, the blind tenor, Andrea Bocelli, singing as part of the opening ceremony prior to the kickoff. They're lined up, and that, if those who weren't already in tears, the idea of listening to this beautiful voice soaring around the Olympic Stadium in Rome absolutely set the rest of them off. And they admit that for the first 10, 12 minutes that they were in pieces, and they're just jelly. And so I interviewed Pep Guardiola about a week ago today, probably, I guess. And I asked him, have you got anything, and you'll avoid doing that again, but get anything up your sleeve? And he was like, no, the ultimate thing that we'll try to do is treat this as a simple Premier League match. The lowest key preparation, not building up at all. He said, I've learned that it's not useful to overexcite my players. Now, if that fails, if for some reason City go, which I don't expect, go out there and they're not on point, Inter have the capacity to bully them and to play in terms of get on top of them and play and attack and be ferocious. It'll surprise me a little bit if Inzaghi starts that way, like he did against Milan, because he understood certain things. Rafa Leao was out. Milan hadn't been playing particularly well. They'd had really hard battles against Napoli, and Inter Inzaghi obviously decided, if we get right at them, if we land a couple of blows on the jaw early on, they may crumble. And he was right. It was just a total mismatch for 45, 50 minutes at least, and the tie was effectively won then. If they go out like that against City, if they sniff anything from City, then Inter can play good football. It's just that they know they're not as good a side as City. I've watched them across 6 or 7 matches this season where they have felt that they might be outmatched. And if you remember against Benfica in the home leg, when it looked like it was all over and completely wrapped up in Inter's favour, I think it ended 3-3 at home. So they've got the capacity to play in a ding-dong battle too if they themselves find that City are cutting them open and take a lead. Inter have the capacity to shed their sort of boxing gloves and go for a match. I think that as long as we get goals from whichever side, and you both know that Inzaghi's side, since he took over at Inter, have played in 8 finals and won 7 of them. So, and in the last 3 of those, they've gone a goal behind. So those who think that there's no chance of entertainment and that it'll be sterile on Saturday, I think are working on a pretty partial information.
Graham, you mentioned you spoke to Pep Guardiola within the last week or so. What's he like to sit down with, both on air and off air? Because he rubs people off the wrong way, rubs people up the wrong way sometimes.
I speak to a lot of people who interview him on a weekly basis, or twice, in a month, and they will say that if you catch him when he's annoyed, that he'll maybe be sort of leaning into the question and pretending not to hear it, or he'll cough during your question, and I love the way that it's if you're catching him in the wrong day, it's a gladiatorial battle. I really enjoy watching his press conferences, and I treat him with respect, even though we've known each other now for a long time. I treat him with ultimate respect in terms of trying to be persuasive for him to open up and enjoy the interview. If whether I'm sitting down with him, whether it's in Zoom, whether I put a question in a press conference, I take as much care with him as probably I've ever done with anybody when I'm interviewing, because first of all, I don't normally expect to rile him up. But I want good answers. I want to understand more about him. I want to understand more about his team or his tactics. I'm not there for a headline. I want to understand more. I want there to be value in getting this. Listen, I think he's a Mozart of football. I think he's right up there with anybody who's coached or designed systems in sport. And therefore, while he's doing so, while he's still working at club level, I want the most out of him. So what I find is that it's undoubtedly the case that it's a benefit that there's trust when I speak to him. So I think it's a little bit I'm anomalous in that there's no way we're bosom buddies, and there's no way he's going to give me a pass. If I screw up and ask a stupid question, then I'm going to end up with mud on my face. Be sure about that. But he knows what I'm interested in. He knows that when I'm asking things, I won't be asking polemic. I'll be wanting him to explain better. So usually he tries. And I found last week he was, for example, I said to him, with the things that happened to you in the Champions League, have you ever grown to hate the competition? He just laughed. And he went, look, I've had experiences which were extremely painful and which last with me. I've had experiences which broke up projects. And, I coached in Germany well and didn't win it there. But he said, if I die this week, if I die tomorrow, I've played in a Champions League final for the club that I love and I've won it. I've coached 2 Champions League finals for the club that I love and I've won them. And the one he went to really surprised me. He said, I got so close to getting into the final. And he mentioned Bayern Munich against Atletico Madrid, which people don't remember. It was the final that Atleti got to the second time against Real Madrid, which was the finals in Milan. And Bayern should have won, and Atleti clung on, and Bayern and Atleti missed penalties in the first leg, in the second leg in Bavaria. And somehow, my memory tells me, who was the keeper? Was it Courtois? It must have been Courtois. Anyway, at any rate, Atleti cling on, and somehow Oblak maybe do it. And that was the final. The semi-final that Pep's mind went to immediately, and he said we were so close to getting to the final that time. And for him, the answer was that this competition has given him personally much more than it's taken away from him. But I'll close this long rambling answer by telling you that in the open day on Tuesday, I guess it was, which was partly in the Academy indoor arena where they have a full-size pitch, and it was part of, and training was open, which was just magnificent. I'll tell you something about training if you want to know in a minute. But Thierry Henry was up for CBS to interview Pep, something that he's done before. And of course, he played in that first treble-winning side in 2009, played when in Rome against United when Thierry Henry assesses himself to have been about 60% fit, doesn't know how he got on the pitch. And he was nervous. He was nervous about this interview. He was well prepared. I watched from a distance. Pep was animated, really enjoyed it. It was the only one-on-one that Pep was doing last Tuesday. And if Thierry Henry goes into an interview a little bit concerned about how does he get it right, what should he not ask, then you know that Pep's achieved one of the things that he wants to, which is he wants interviewers to think hard about what they're asking, and he wants to make it look like it might be a daunting experience. So interviewing Pep, for my taste, is fun, because if you boys interview all the time across all sports, and you know the types of people you come across. You come across a wide range of people, some who enjoy speaking, some who enjoy messing you about. And it's a test, and it should be a test for us, and it should sharpen our skills. And that's how I find him. I would interview him every single week if I was allowed to, if I was able to. And then my strike rate for getting a good interview from him might well go down.
I'm not sure about that, Graham. I have heard him joke about the cliche about, well, he overthinks the finals. I've heard him have a gag about that. And I don't know if that was his way of sort of ripping the plaster off and saying, listen, I'm here for it, let's discuss it, or if actually it was like a real thing in his mind, and it's going to be a factor for him this weekend. Did that come up in the conversation, and what are your views on that?
No, well, my views are pungent, as you might imagine. I think that, probably, even though I've heard a couple of words escape on Off the Ball AM, I won't use the word that I'd like to, but it would rhyme with bucking right. It's absolute nonsense. There was really one final where there was controversy over a positional strategy that he used, which was the final against Chelsea, in the oddest of times. It was at the. It was when there had been so many months without fans and so many months of pandemic, and he chose not to use a pivote, and people harp on about that because it was taken as a theme before the match, and nobody that I have seen when that final gets talked about, nobody talks about the outright assault by Rudiger on Kevin De Bruyne after about an hour, which robbed Manchester City of their best player and didn't get Rudiger a red card, which it fully merited. Smashed De Bruyne's face up. I think he fractured a cheekbone. His nose was all over the place. He was taken off, couldn't continue. It was a deliberate body check by Rudiger. It was, we're starting to get into slightly, and I mean for you guys who cover rugby so much, slightly better concussion protocols in football is pathetic compared to the way that rugby players are properly treated. But nonetheless, there is this motion that in football that there's an idea that maybe the head's an important part of the human, and maybe we should protect it slightly better, and there was nothing done, and that doesn't get talked about. Whereas some idea that nobody's analytically ever said that it was the lack of a pivote that meant that Chelsea won instead of Manchester City. Nobody's ever said that. Well, no, maybe Pep doesn't talk about it an awful lot, but I know that Guardiola feels that Tuchel's Chelsea was the single best team he's ever come across, whether he's been in charge of Barca, Bayern Munich or Manchester City. Tuchel's Chelsea was the single best team to know what to do with the ball, to know what to do with their strategy once they pressed the ball and won it back off City. Pep Guardiola's idea was that in his time as a coach, other teams have tackled his players, have intercepted a pass, have pressed and won the ball, but his overbearing idea is that most of the time, because opposition teams do that relatively rarely against his teams, opposition teams then don't necessarily use their possession they've won back cleverly. They'll press too hard. They'll push quickly when they're not ready to attack. They'll make a nervous pass, or they'll make a pass full of exuberance and extra. Look, we've won the ball back. Look, oh, we just lost it again. And Tuchel's team didn't. Guardiola, not just in that final, perpetually against Tuchel's Chelsea, and increasingly in Germany when Tuchel was learning how to play against Guardiola when they were Dortmund and Bayern Munich coaches respectively. That was the thing that Tuchel had as a secret weapon, that he coached his teams that wouldn't be automatic that they'd smash into attack if they won the ball off City. They would if the gaps were there, but if the gaps weren't there, they would retrench and hold the ball and start to build themselves. And that was one of the absolute key things that won that final. And this idea that Pep tinkers or comes up with crazy ideas, in terms of generally that he's rethinking ideas, that his strategies become complicated, and that certain players, chafe under the burden of do this, don't do that, and I've changed what I'm telling you from 2 years ago or from half a season ago because this is how I see it now. Those things do chafe the players because certain players get into comfort zones and think, well, if we're winning, do not change a winning habit. Pep is not of the idea that if it ain't broke, don't fix it. He's perpetually trying to stay ahead. So some players chafe at that. But the idea that he comes up with fanciful nonsense in big occasions, I think that's just a myth.
Graham, before we leave you, give it to us in a word. City or Inter?
City and entertaining. Don't miss it.
Okay, well, we'll settle for that, and I do look forward to the Partick v Clare final at some point down the track.
It'll happen, it will.
Enjoy it. Thanks, Graham.
See you, fellas.
Graham Hunter on the line there.